I stood in the Ridgewell kitchen, my left cheek burning, the smell of dish soap and white wine rising from the stone floor. The intimate family party had started without my grandfather, the richest man in the room, yet uninvited. As my stepmother's metal bracelet struck my cheekbone with the sound of a spoon hitting glass, the doorbell rang. He entered, walnut cane in hand, his eyes fixed on my bruise, and I heard him whisper into his hearing aid, "Lock every account. Call the lawyers." My name is Ava Ridgewell. I am 29 years old, and I am the analysis team lead at Glass & Bray Partners, an investment firm that smells like old money and new glass. Tonight, I was at 11 Larkspur Street, in the Maple Heights district of Grayford, a city that always felt like it was holding its breath. The house, my father's house, was suffocating under the weight of a quiet, persistent drizzle that beaded on the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was my father's birthday. The air inside was thick with the competing scents of damp cashmere, expensive floral perfume, and the heavy savory aroma of roast beef that had been warming too long. I stood in the kitchen, the chill of the quartz countertop seeping into my forearms. The party, a carefully curated, intimate family affair, hummed on the other side of the pass-through. Laughter, high and thin, punctuated the low murmur of stock market anxieties dressed up as casual conversation. My stepmother, Marla, was the source of this curation. Marla was not just my father's wife. She was the chief financial officer at Glass & Bray. She was a woman who calibrated her smiles like she calibrated quarterly earnings projections. In the office, she wielded power through budgets and board-level alliances. Here, at 11 Larkspur, she wielded it with seating charts and the passive-aggressive placement of coasters. She held the family's expense cards, and in doing so, she held the family's voice. This family party had one glaring omission. My grandfather, Harlan Ridgewell, was not invited. Harlan was the one who had seeded Glass & Bray. His name wasn't on the door, but his money was in the foundation, in the steel skeleton of the building itself. He was, without question, the wealthiest person in any room he chose to enter, but he was not in this room. I'd overheard the whispered justification from one of Marla's new in-laws earlier, near the bar. "Oh, Harlan? It's just, he makes the atmosphere so heavy." Heavy, because he didn't lubricate conversations with false praise, because his silence was more judgmental than another man's lecture. He was a relic of an era Marla was desperate to pave over with brushed nickel and leveraged buyouts. So, he was left in his condo across town, 8 minutes away, presumably reading annual reports while his son celebrated a birthday without him. The main lights in the kitchen were off, leaving the room in the cool blue-white glow of the under-cabinet LEDs. It made the stainless steel appliances look like morgue equipment. I was here to retrieve the cake. It was a multi-layered affair, professionally done, coated in a frosting so white it looked chemical. I slid the heavy ceramic platter toward me, the base grating slightly on the quartz. That's when she entered, a shadow detaching itself from the doorway. Marla. She didn't make a sound, but the air pressure changed. Her perfume, sharp, green, and commanding, arrived before she did. She stopped near the industrial-sized wine fridge, her reflection a broken silhouette in its smoked glass door. "Ava," she said. Her voice was a low CFO voice, the one she used just before gutting a department's budget. It was meant to convey confidential, serious concern. It was a predator's purr. "Marla." I didn't turn around. I focused on sliding a silver knife under the first slice of cake. "Your quarterly risk analysis," she began. Stepping closer, I could feel the warmth radiating from her, a stark contrast to the cold room. "It's aggressive. You're flagging projections that the board has already signed off on. You're making the numbers look bad." I paused, the knife halfway through the dense fudge. "The numbers are bad. Marla, my report just reflects that." "Your report," she hissed, "is painting a target. We need stability. We need confidence." I finally turned, leaning my hip against the counter. The cake sat between us like a white, sugary truce flag that neither of us intended to honor. Stability is one thing, obfuscation is another. You wanted a risk analysis. I gave you one. The volatility models don't lie. Her eyes, a pale, cold blue, narrowed. You're a team lead. Ava, not an auditor. Know your place. The acrid taste of adrenaline hit the back of my throat. It tasted like pennies. I knew what she was doing. This wasn't a professional critique. It was a domestic power play, using the office as her weapon. So I used mine. Speaking of auditing, I said, my voice just as low as hers. I was running diagnostics on the new compliance software. It flagged a vendor. I watched her face. Nothing. A mask of polished porcelain. A mysterious bonus payment, I continued, paid out to a new supplier. Brindle Apex. It was coded as an IT infrastructure expense, but the payment IP address, it wasn't a corporate park. It resolves to a residential router. Right here in Maple Heights. I let the silence stretch. The only sound the faint whir of the wine fridge's compressor. It matches the IP address of this house. Marla. The porcelain cracked. It was a micro-expression, a tightening around her mouth, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury in her pupils. She had expected a cowering employee. She got a Ridgewell. The slap was fast. I didn't see the wind-up. I only registered the consequence. Her hand was heavy, but it was the jewelry that did the damage. A thick, modern, metal bracelet, I think it was titanium, struck my cheekbone first. It made a sound, a thin, sharp ting, like a silver spoon hitting the rim of a crystal glass. The force snapped my head back. I stumbled, my back hitting the cold, smooth plaster of the kitchen wall. My hand, which had been resting on the counter, spasmed and knocked over a half-full glass of Sauvignon Blanc. The glass didn't just tip, it fell to the floor. It shattered. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet kitchen. A spray of cold wine and glass shards peppered my ankles. The smell of cheap dish soap from the sink drain mingled instantly with the sharp, acidic aroma of the spilled wine. And my cheek, it wasn't just stinging, it was burning. A deep, hot, throbbing pulse that radiated from my cheekbone up to my temple and down to my jaw. I tasted salt and metal. Marla didn't move. She stood over me, her hands still slightly raised, her chest heaving. Her face was white with rage. "You," she whispered, "will be silent." I just stared back, breathing hard, trying to focus. My vision was watery in my left eye. And that's when I noticed the light. On the counter, next to the coffee maker, sat the house's smart speaker. A squat, gray fabric cylinder. Its light ring, usually dark, was cycling a slow, steady blue. Streaming. It wasn't playing music. Someone, one of the cousins perhaps, must have activated the drop-in feature to the family group account, probably trying to call the kids without shouting. It was an accidental, open audio channel. The open channel my grandfather, Harlan, was a part of. The channel he monitored like a hawk. Convinced it was the only way to know what was really happening in the family he was no longer invited to join. Marla saw my eyes shift. She looked at the speaker. The blue light pulsed, listening, transmitting. She lunged for the mute button, a small circle with a line through it, jabbing it with her finger. The light ring flashed red, then went dark. Silence. The only sounds were the drip, drip, drip of wine running off the counter onto the stone floor, and the distant, muffled thrum of the party. Marla looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger. I saw cold, calculating panic. Before either of us could speak, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite, melodic chime. It was an impatient, angry buzz, pressed and held. Bzzz. The music in the living room stopped abruptly. The murmur of voices died. I heard my father's voice, flustered. "I'll get it. I heard the heavy front door open. Muffled voices. Someone, my father, was trying to stop the visitor. "Harlan, this isn't a good time. It's..." We're in the middle of... Get out of my way, Robert. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the entire house. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, immediate obedience. A single rhythmic thud echoed on the hardwood floor of the foyer. And again, thud. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. My grandfather, Harlan Ridgewell. He was in his usual armor, dark wool trousers, a thick cashmere turtleneck, and a heavy tweed jacket. Despite it being his son's birthday party, raindrops glistened on the shoulders of the tweed. He was leaning on his cane, the one carved from a single piece of dark walnut, topped with a simple, unadorned silver cap. He was 80, but he stood straighter than my father. His eyes, the same cold blue as Marla's, but carrying the weight of a century, swept the room. They took in the shattered glass, the spreading pool of white wine, Marla's frozen posture of aggression, and finally, my face. His gaze locked onto the bright red, already darkening handprint on my left cheek. I saw his jaw clench. Just once, the muscle in his temple tightened. He did not rush to me. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not hug me. Harlan Ridgewell was not a man of comfort. He was a man of action. He looked past me, at Marla. He didn't say a word to her. He simply dismissed her as irrelevant. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved his phone. It was an old model smartphone, functional, not flashy. With his thumb, he dialed a single number. He lifted the phone, not to his ear, but to his hearing aid, tapping it to sync the Bluetooth. I watched him. Marla watched him. From the hallway, I could feel the eyes of 20 party guests watching him. He spoke, his voice quiet, flat, and absolutely final. I heard him clearly, and I heard the faint, tinny echo of his voice coming from the phone's speaker. "Lock every account," he said. "Call the lawyers." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. His eyes never left my bruise. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. The silence in the kitchen was louder than the shatter. It was a vacuum, pulling all the air from the room, leaving only the sharp scents of wine and soap and the faint, metallic tang of blood on my tongue where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. Harlan's words, "Emergency board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., hung in the air, cold and solid as the steel appliances around us. My gaze drifted from my grandfather's unyielding face to the shattered glass on the floor, and in its reflection, I didn't see the kitchen, I saw the 38th floor. Grayford is a city of glass and rain, and the Glass and Bray Partners headquarters is its cathedral. It's a 60-story blade of reflective, triple-paned glass that cuts into the perpetually damp sky. On the 38th floor, there is a meeting room at the northeast corner, encased in floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides. It was originally named the Summit Room. When Marla took over as CFO, she had it renovated. She ripped out the warm walnut paneling and replaced it with brushed steel, black marble, and a single, 20-foot-long table made of smoked glass that seemed to float. She renamed it Catalyst. It was a room designed not for collaboration, but for interrogation, a place where the city skyline stared at you, judging. It was a power display, and tomorrow at 9 a.m., it would serve its purpose. I didn't get my job at Glass and Bray because I was a Ridgewell. I got it because I was the best. I had joined as a junior analyst 8 years ago, fresh from my master's program, under my mother's maiden name. I built my career on a foundation of data, precision, and an inhuman tolerance for staring at spreadsheets until the numbers bled into patterns. I was good. I was fast. I became analysis team lead on my own merit. Only one person in the company knew the truth. Harlan. He'd respected my choice. "Let them see the work, not the name," he'd said. "The name is an asset, but skill is a weapon. Don't confuse them." Then my father, weakened by a mild recession and loneliness, had met Marla at a banking conference. 6 months later, they were married. 3 months after that, she was nominated to the board by a new holding company, and 9 months later, she was CFO. Her arrival at Glastonbury was like a hostile weather front. The culture shifted. Suddenly, our open-door policy was replaced with scheduled syncs. Collaboration rooms were repurposed as executive suites, and the company mantra, once focused on sustainable growth, became all about the green report. "I only want to see green," she'd say in leadership meetings, her voice a smooth, polished stone. "Green KPIs, green projections, green dashboards. If it's red, it's not a problem. It's a failure of presentation." The company became a pressure cooker. Everyone was obsessed with meeting impossible. Short-term metrics. We were hitting our numbers, quarter after quarter, and the executive team was rewarded handsomely, but I was the one who saw the raw data underneath, and the numbers didn't add up. The pressure was creating cracks. Specifically, money was evaporating. It was disappearing from the supplier cost centers. Small amounts, here and there, dismissed as rounding errors or discretionary overages, but they weren't. My team was responsible for building and maintaining the fraud detection models. 6 months ago, during a routine software update, I ran a new pattern recognition algorithm. A flag popped up, a tiny one. It wasn't one large, obvious theft. It was 17 separate transactions, spread over 4 quarters, all paid to a single vendor I'd never heard of. Brindle Apex Logistics. Each payment was different. $9,500, $8,900, $9,950. But they all had one thing in common. They were all just fractions under the $10,000 automatic audit threshold. It was classic structuring, a deliberate, methodical attempt to stay below the radar. I dug deeper, pulling server logs on my own time, after hours, when the network traffic was low. The payments were coded as IT infrastructure consulting, but Brindle Apex had no website, no corporate filings, no physical address. It was a ghost. A week into my quiet investigation, an email arrived in my inbox at 2:17 a.m. It was from an anonymous, encrypted Proton Mail account. The sender ID was just a string of random characters. The message itself was 2 sentences. "Stop looking at Brindle Apex. Some suppliers are family. Don't touch it." I stared at the screen, the blue light of the monitor painting my face in the dark of my small apartment. The air went cold. Family. This wasn't just a corporate thief. This was her. This was Marla. I knew then that bringing this to HR or compliance would be suicide. Marla was compliance. She had placed her people in every key position. Any report I filed would be shredded, and I would be quietly restructured out of a job for not being a team player. My hands were steady as I moved my mouse. I was no longer an analyst. I was a forensic specialist. I copied the server logs, the transaction IDs, the payment routes, and the cached invoices. I saved it all to a single, encrypted USB drive. The drive was attached to my apartment keys, on a small, brushed metal keychain shaped like a single maple leaf. It had been a gift from Harlan when I got my first apartment in Grayford. "Maple," he'd said. "Strongest wood there is, bends, but never breaks." I made one other copy. I encrypted the file with a 256-bit key, a password based on the latitude and longitude of the house I grew up in, before my mother died, before Marla. I attached the file to a blank email and sent it to Harlan's private, non-corporate address. He would know what it was. It was my insurance policy, my dead man's switch. If I vanished, the data would not. After that, I waited. I continued my job. I ran my reports. I made them green. And I listened. I listened to Marla at Sunday dinners, which were mandatory. She would hold court at the head of the table, my father nodding beside her, a placid, smiling bystander in his own life. "Family is everything," Marla would say, raising her wine glass. "There is nothing more important than protecting the family. We support each other. We present a unified front, family first." But family first was a threat. It meant my secrets first. It meant my stability first. It meant your silence first. My father was her greatest ally, not through action, but through inaction. He was a man who craved stability. He had lost my mother. He had almost lost the company in the 008 crash, and now he just wanted peace. He wanted calm dinners, predictable holidays, and a healthy stock portfolio. Marla gave him all three. His stock bonuses, tied to the very green KPIs Marla was faking, had tripled. He was comfortable, and he was willing to trade his daughter's well-being for that comfort. He saw her dismiss me, undermine me, and isolate me at family events. He saw it, and he called it work stress, or a strong personality. He refused to see the malice because seeing it would require him to act, and acting was unstable. So I stayed silent. I watched Marla grow bolder, siphoning more, hiding it behind more complex shell companies. I watched my father sink deeper into his comfortable denial. I did not act. I did not confront. I let the trap close. I let the pressure build in the cooker. I let her believe she was invincible, that her control was absolute. And tonight, in the kitchen, she had finally, fatally, overestimated her power. She had brought the cold steel of the 38th floor into the home. She had put her hands on me, and she had done it on an open mic. I brought my hand up to my face. The skin was hot and tight, the bone beneath it aching. The blood on my tongue was real. Harlan was still watching me. His gaze was intense, not with sympathy, but with something else, assessment. "Ava," he said, his voice a low rumble. I met his eyes. The pain in my cheek sharpened my focus. The fog of fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. The trap was no longer just closing, it was set. All it needed was the final snap. "I'm ready, Grandpa," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice of the analysis team lead, the one who had the data, the one who knew exactly where the numbers bled. Harlan stood in the threshold between the bright, warm living room and the cold, sterile kitchen. He was a cutout, a silhouette against the party he wasn't invited to. The yellow, festive light from the living room hit his back, illuminating the halo of fine rain that clung to the dark wool of his sweater. His shoulders were damp. He seemed to have absorbed the cold drizzle of the Grayford night and carried it into the house with him. The party guests, frozen in place, were a gallery of gaping mouths and wide eyes. A woman in a red silk dress was holding a champagne flute halfway to her lips, unmoving. My father, Robert, was plastered against the wall of the foyer, his face a mask of pale, sweating shock. Marla was the first to move, her composure, shattered for a moment by the slap and the open mic, clicked back into place. It was a terrifying display of social engineering. A smile, bright and brittle, stretched across her face, a hostess smile, designed to neutralize any threat. "Harlan," she said, her voice dripping with a false, saccharine welcome. "What an unexpected surprise. We thought you were resting." She glided forward, her hand fluttering in the air, not toward him, but toward a passing caterer. "Marco, please, take Mr. Ridgewell's coat. He must be freezing." Harlan did not look at the server. He simply raised his left hand, palm out, a gesture of absolute negation. "No." The server, a young man in a black vest, froze instantly. Caught between Marla's command and Harlan's authority, he wisely retreated. Marla's smile faltered, just a fraction of an inch. She was no longer a hostess. She was a CFO facing an unexpected variable. Then, Harlan moved. He took one step into the kitchen. The silver cap of his walnut cane met the Italian stone floor. Thud. The sound was dull, heavy, and final. He did it again, thud. And a third time, thud. It was a signal I hadn't heard since I was a child. At long, chaotic Sunday dinners before my mother passed, 3 taps of the cane. It was the Ridgewell equivalent of a gavel strike, a non-negotiable command for absolute, immediate silence. If the doorbell had quieted the party, the 3 taps killed it. The last whisper of conversation died. The clinking of ice and glasses stopped. The only sound in the entire house was the whir of the wine fridge and the faint, tinny sound of a jazz trio still playing on a speaker in the den. Harlan's eyes, which had been scanning the room, the glass, the wine, Marla, now settled on me. He hadn't moved closer. He was still 10 feet away. He didn't look at my father, or the guests, or the woman who had just assaulted me. He looked only at me. His gaze was not soft. It was not comforting. It was an assessment. He was a metallurgist testing steel, checking for fractures. "Ava," he said, his voice quiet but caring in the enforced silence. "Can you still hear clearly?" The question was layered. He wasn't just asking about the slap. He was asking if my mind was clear, if I was compromised, if I was still in the fight. I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood from where my teeth had broken the skin inside my cheek. The throbbing pain in my face was a grounding rod, channeling away the shock, leaving only a cold, sharp focus. I did not trust my voice, so I just nodded. Once. He held my gaze for another second, then seemed satisfied. He had his answer. The steel was intact. Only then did he turn his attention. He shifted his stance, his body angling away from me and toward the foyer, where my father was trying to blend into the wallpaper. "Robert!" My father flinched, as if Harlan had thrown something. "Tomorrow," Harlan stated. It was not a request. 9 a.m., Catalyst, be there. My father's eyes darted frantically, hopelessly, between Harlan's unmoving face and Marla's. He was a man trapped between his lioness and his lion. Marla stepped forward, placing herself physically between her husband and my grandfather. The mask of the polite hostess was gone, replaced by the cold arrogance of the CFO. She laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound that was louder than the slap had been. "Don't be absurd. Harlan," she scoffed, crossing her arms. The metal bracelet that had hit me glinted under the LEDs. "You're retired. You gave up your proxy seat 2 years ago. You can't call an emergency meeting. You have no standing." She smiled, a victor's smile. She thought she had him. He was just an old, sentimental man, barging in, making empty threats. Harlan watched her. He seemed almost bored. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I have never needed a seat, Marla," he said, his voice flat. "I have a clause." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Marla's face. A clause? Her entire world was built on contracts, on loopholes, on the fine print she wrote and exploited. The idea of a clause she didn't know about was an existential threat. "What clause?" she demanded. Harlan didn't answer. He didn't need to. His phone, in his jacket pocket, began to vibrate. It wasn't a ring, just a low, powerful buzz, like an angry insect trapped in wool. He ignored it for a moment, letting the sound drill into the silence, letting Marla's question hang in the air. He was a master of timing. Finally, he reached into his pocket, retrieved the phone, and glanced at the screen. He tapped his hearing aid, syncing the call. "Yes," he said into the air. He listened. "Yes, they are." He was looking directly at Marla. "My attorney confirms. The freeze is in place." "What freeze?" Marla's voice was sharp, a little too high. "The executive bonus pool," Harlan said, as casually as if commenting on the rain. "As of 2 minutes ago, all payouts scheduled for end of quarter are indefinitely suspended." My father made a small, choking sound from the hallway. His entire stable life was built on those payouts. "You can't," Marla hissed. "That requires a full board vote. You don't have the votes." "I don't need votes," Harlan replied, his voice still terrifyingly calm. "I have the Founders' Agreement, Article 5, Section 2, the Detrimental Conduct Clause. It grants any founding investor the right to temporarily freeze all discretionary compensation if a key officer, how does it put it, engages in behavior that brings moral, ethical, or criminal disrepute upon the firm." He tapped his hearing aid again. "And the audio file?" He listened. "Authenticated. Good." He looked back at Marla. "The slap. Marla. The sound of your bracelet on my granddaughter's face. The streaming speaker. It was all authenticated by my legal team's forensic audio unit in the last 5 minutes. That, I believe, qualifies as detrimental conduct. This was it. This was the moment. For the first time all night, for the first time in the years I had known her, Marla's face changed. The blood didn't just drain from it, it evacuated. The polished, porcelain mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. She was left with the raw, mottled, furious face of a cornered animal. It wasn't the violence that had undone her. It wasn't the shame. It was the money. He had hit her in the bonuses. He had frozen her power, her security, her entire faked green KPI empire with a single clause. "You," she stammered. "You, old bastard. You can't." "I have," Harlan said. He lowered his phone. The show was over. He had drawn blood, and he did not need to gloat. He turned, his back to Marla, his back to my father. He dismissed them. The crowd of guests in the foyer parted like the sea, no one daring to meet his eye, no one wanting to be associated with the losing side. He walked past me, still standing by the wall, by the shattered glass. He did not touch me. He did not offer a hand. He did not say a word of comfort. His walnut cane tapped a steady, rhythmic beat on the floor as he walked away. He reached the kitchen counter, near the entrance. He paused. From his inner jacket pocket, he withdrew a thick 9x12 manila envelope. It was heavy, at least an inch thick, sealed with a clasp. He didn't hand it to me. He simply placed it on the quartz counter, right next to the pristine, untouched birthday cake. The contrast was stark. The white, celebratory lie, and the heavy brown, legal truth. Then he was gone. I heard the thud of his cane receding down the hall. I heard the heavy front door open, letting in a rush of cold, damp air that smelled like rain and ozone. I heard it click shut, a sound as final as a vault door. The party stood in absolute tomb-like silence. Marla was shaking, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. My father was leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. I didn't look at them. I pushed myself off the wall, my legs unsteady. I ignored the stinging glass shards on the floor. I walked to the counter, my eyes fixed on the envelope. My shadow, long and thin under the kitchen lights, fell across it. I placed my hand on it. It was thick. It was heavy. It was real. The party was over. The thud of the heavy front door clicking shut was a sound of absolute finality. It was an acoustic full stop. The party, which had been flash-frozen by Harlan's arrival, now shattered into panicked motion. The living room, moments ago silent as a tomb, erupted in a flurry of low, urgent whispers. Coats were snatched from the rack. Excuses were murmured. A desperate chorus of sudden headache, early meeting, must check on the kids, and so sorry, Robert, awful business. They fled. They didn't walk. They fled, escaping the blast radius of a corporate and domestic detonation. No one wanted to be a witness. No one wanted to be called to testify. Within 3 minutes, the house at 11 Larkspur Street was empty. Empty, save for the 3 of us, and the catering staff, who were now silently, meticulously, cleaning up the shattered wine glass from the stone floor, their eyes firmly fixed on their work, refusing to look at anyone. I didn't watch the guests go. I didn't look at my father. Robert, who had collapsed into a plush velvet armchair in the living room, his face pale and sweating, his hands covering his eyes. He was a portrait of willful blindness. And I didn't look at Marla. She was pacing the foyer, her phone clamped to her ear. Her back was rigid. I could hear the faint, sharp staccato of her voice, not the smooth, controlled purr of the CFO, but the high, jagged shriek of an animal caught in a snare. She was talking to her own lawyer, I assumed. She was vibrating with a silent, toxic rage. I was alone in the kitchen. The air was cold. The only scent, the lingering, acidic bite of wine and the chemical smell of the floor cleaner. The multi-layered birthday cake sat on the counter, a white, frosted monument to a celebration that was now a crime scene. Beside it sat the manila envelope. My hand was steady. The throbbing in my cheek had become a dull, metronomic beat. A reminder to stay focused. I picked up the envelope. It was thick, heavy with intent. I fumbled with the metal clasp. The brad stiff and unyielding. I bent a nail pulling it open. I slid the contents onto the cold quartz counter. It wasn't one document. It was a stack, perhaps 40 pages, bound by a simple black clip. The top page was a cover sheet. It read, "Confidential, for eyes of a Ridgewell only, in Governance Review, G&B Key Officer Conduct." Below it, the document Harlan had spoken of. It was a clean photocopy of a document I had never seen. Glass and Bray Partners, amended and restated Founders Investor Agreement, a section in the middle. Article 5 was highlighted in a pale, weak yellow. Section 2, the Ridgewell Clause. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He had named it. He had named it after himself. It wasn't just a legal provision. It was a brand, a warning. I began to read. My mind, trained to dissect dense financial reports, slipping easily into the legalese. The style was cold, precise, and utterly ruthless. In the event a key officer, defined in Appendix A as C-suite and board members, is found to have engaged in verifiable acts of domestic violence, physical assault, or severe emotional or financial abuse within the related party ecosystem as. I paused on that phrase, related party ecosystem. It was a term an analyst like me would invent. It wasn't the warm, messy language of family. It was the cold, sterile language of a data model. He had defined family in corporate terms. He had drawn a circle that included me, living in my own apartment, but still bound by the blood and the name. He had created a legal perimeter. Said officers' voting rights, proxy controls, and all discretionary compensation, including but not limited to stock options, bonuses, and futures, shall be immediately and temporarily suspended, pending a full internal investigation by a board-appointed independent third-party ethics committee. It was brilliant, utterly, terrifyingly brilliant. He wasn't moving to fire her. That would be messy, public, a protracted legal battle. He wasn't even accusing her of the theft. Yet, he was silencing her. He was suspending her. He was taking her power, the votes, the proxy controls, the things that allowed her to control the board, which allowed her to control my father, which allowed her to control the company. He was using the slap, the hot, emotional, domestic crime, as the legal key to unlock the door. Once that door was open, we could bring in the other crime, the cold, calculated, corporate one. I turned the page. The next section was titled, Triggering Conditions and Evidence. Triggering of said suspension requires indisputable proof to be presented to the board by the founding investor or their legal designate. Acceptable proof includes, but is not limited to, A, testimony from multiple direct, non-affiliated witnesses, or B, a verified, time-stamped, and forensically authenticated audio or video recording. A, the witnesses, 20 party guests who had heard the ting of the bracelet and my gasp. B, the recording. I looked at the squat, gray smart speaker on the counter. It was dark, mute, harmless. Tucked into the stack of papers, the next document was a simple IT schematic of the smart home network for 11 Larkspur Street. A handwritten note, in Harlan's sharp, angular script, was on a sticky note attached to the corner. All audio data from Family Group Drop-In feature auto-syncs and archives to HR Private Cloud Server, Server ID HRGVN001, AES 256 encrypted, retention 90 days. My God. He had paid for this system. It was his housewarming gift to my father and Marla when they married 2 years ago. Had he known, even then? Had he anticipated a moment just like this? Or was he simply a man who believed, on principle, in collecting data? It wasn't an accident. It was a pipeline, a passive surveillance system, hidden under the guise of familial convenience. The audio file of Marla's threat and the sound of the slap was already on his server, copied, encrypted, and secured. Long before Marla's panicked finger had jammed the mute button, he had established a perfect, unbroken chain of custody for the data before the crime was even committed. He had her. Cold. The next set of papers was not legal. It was data. It was my Brindle Apex file. But it wasn't just my file. It was my data, annotated. I saw my own findings. The 17 transactions, all just under the $10,000 audit threshold. But next to them, in columns I hadn't built, was more. Payment authorization 001, 9500, IP 72.14.213.101, Maple Heights Residential IP Pool, VPN active, no, device ID, Marlab iPhone 14, payment authorization 002, 8900, IP 72.4.213.101, Maple Heights Residential IP Pool, VPN active, no, device ID, Marlab iPhone 14. He had her device ID. He had cross-referenced the payment authorizations from the company servers with the house's local network logs. The first transaction was dated 3 months ago. I had sent Harlan my encrypted file, my insurance policy, just 6 weeks ago. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold in the room. I thought I had been alone, a quiet analyst digging in the dark, terrified she would find me out. I was wrong. He had been watching this, tracking it, before I even sent him my data. I wasn't an informant. I was a confirmation. He had been building his own case, running his own surveillance. He had his own team, forensic accountants, IT specialists. The file included satellite photos of the Brindle Apex Logistics address, which was, just as I suspected, an empty lot in a disused industrial park north of Grayford. For 3 long, isolating months, I had been the hunter, but he had been the trap setter. We had been working in parallel, and I hadn't even known. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't an insurgent. I was the tip of his spear. The adrenaline that had been singing in my veins for the last hour was finally fading, leaving behind a deep, seismic ache. My cheekbone felt huge, swollen, and hot to the touch. I went to the industrial-sized freezer. My reflection in the stainless steel was a distorted mask, one eye swollen, the skin a angry, mottled red. I pulled out an ice tray, dumped the perfect, clear cubes into a clean dish towel, and pressed the bundle to my face. The cold was a violent shock, a blessed relief that made my teeth ache. As I stood there, ice melting and dripping down my neck, my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up. A call. It was Arthur Vale, Harlan's chief internal counsel, a name I recognized from company-wide memos on compliance. I answered, Ava Ridgewell. Ms. Ridgewell. His voice was dry, like old paper. This is Arthur Vale. I am acting as lead counsel for Harlan Ridgewell. I trust you have received the package. I have it, I said. Good. Do not speak to anyone. Do not answer any questions from Marla, your father, or anyone from corporate. A car will be at your apartment at 08:30. Be at the 38th floor by 08:45, that is all. The call ended. No pleasantries. Keep silent until morning. The order was clear. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a legal maneuver, a corporate takeover executed with the precision of a military operation. I stood there, ice to my face, looking at the 2 piles of paper on the counter. The Ridgewell clause and the Brindle Apex file, the violence and the motive, the hand and the money, they were now one and the same. I needed my own file, the one on my USB drive, hidden in my apartment. Harlan had his data, but I had mine. I grabbed a thick paper napkin from the dispenser by the sink. I pulled a pen from a drawer full of wine openers and rubber bands. I scribbled a note to myself, a reminder for the morning. Catalyst, bring the maple leaf. As if summoned by the thought, my phone buzzed again. Not a call, a text message. From Marla. The preview lit up the screen. You've made a terrible mistake. This is a private family matter. Do not dare to bring this into the office. You will destroy your father, and you will destroy yourself. I read the text. the blue light of the phone illuminating my bruised face. The hypocrisy was so potent, so acidic, it almost made me laugh. A private family matter. She had threatened my job in the kitchen. She had hit me over a corporate report. She was stealing from the company she served as CFO. She had made work and home the same battlefield. She had mixed the two streams, and now she was drowning in her own toxic runoff. My fingers were steady as they typed the reply. The ice had numbed my hand, but my mind was sharp. We're the ones who brought work into the home. I hit send. I let the damp dish towel fall onto the counter. Next to the uneaten cake, I scooped the papers back into the manila envelope. I walked out of the kitchen, past the living room where my father still sat with his head in his hands, and out the front door into the cold, clean, rain-washed night. I didn't say goodbye. The black town car, the one Harlan's counsel had sent, was silent on the inside. It cut through the 8:30 a.m. Grayford traffic like a hearse. The rain wasn't a drizzle anymore. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water that lashed the windows, turning the city of glass into a warped, watercolor blur. My cheek was a swollen, grotesque map of purple and yellow. I had applied concealer, a thick, desperate layer, but it was like painting over a crater. It didn't hide the damage. It just made it look pallid and sick. I walked into the lobby of the Glastonbury Tower at 8:47 a.m. The security guard, a man I'd nodded to every morning for 8 years, looked at my face, then quickly looked away, his own face flushing. He just waved me through. The news, or at least the rumor, had already spread. The elevator ride to the 38th floor was a silent, pressurized ascent. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was different. The usual morning chatter was gone. The air was cold, static, humming with fear. I walked toward the corner office. The large digital display outside the smoked glass doors of Catalyst usually showed commodity prices or a cheerful, "Welcome," client name. This morning, it was blank, save for 3 words in a stark, white, sans serif font. Emergency governance session, 9:00 a.m. The doors hissed open. The room was already populated. It was, as always, freezing. The rain hammered against the 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows, a frantic, drumming sound that provided the room's only soundtrack. I was the first of our family to arrive. I walked the full length of the 20-foot glass table and took my seat. Seat 11, the one at the far end, the one reserved for junior executives or analysts presenting data, the one with no power. It was perfect. At 8:54, they arrived together, Marla and my father. Marla was immaculate. She wore a severe dark gray suit with a razor-sharp cut. Her hair pulled back into a knot so tight it looked painful. Her face was a mask of pale, powdered concrete. She had her CFO face on, impassive, bored, slightly annoyed, as if this whole meeting was a procedural inconvenience. She radiated a dangerous, brittle calm. My father, Robert, was her shadow. He was gray. His suit was gray. His face was gray. His eyes were gray and empty. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked broken. He sat next to Marla, at the center of the table, and immediately opened his laptop, staring at the blank screen as if it held the answers to the universe. He did not look at me. At 8:58, Bram Kincaid, the CEO, strode in. Bram was a man who lived on charisma and golf courses, a classic sales CEO who let his department heads run the details. He looked annoyed, tapping his expensive watch. "Let's get this circus started," he grumbled, taking his seat at the head of the table. He looked at me, at the far end. "Ava, right? Analysis? What in God's name is this about? Harlan's pulling a coup?" I didn't answer. I just watched the door. At 9:02 a.m. exactly, the doors hissed open again. Harlan entered. He wore a dark blue pinstripe suit, perfectly tailored, a suit I hadn't seen him in since he'd retired. He was followed by his lawyer, Arthur Vale, who carried a slim leather briefcase. Bram Kincaid half stood. "Harlan, what is this? You froze my executive bonuses. You've got the board in a full-blown panic." Harlan ignored him. He walked to the empty guest chair near the head of the table, directly opposite Marla. He did not sit. He placed his walnut cane, not on the floor, but leaning ramrod straight against the glass table, like a rifle at parade rest. Arthur Vale sat, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a small, professional, studio-grade digital audio recorder. He placed it in the center of the glass table. "For the record," Vale said, his dry voice cutting through the drumming of the rain, "this is an emergency governance session convened under Article 5, Section 2 of the Founders' Agreement. Present are CEO Bram Kincaid, CFO Marla Ridgewell, Board Member Robert Ridgewell, and Ms. Ava Ridgewell, as a material witness." "Material witness?" Marla scoffed. Her first words, "This is absurd. This is a family dispute." "We are here to determine that," Vale said, his eyes flat. He pressed a button on the recorder. A small red light glowed. "This meeting is now on the record." Vale then slid a second device onto the table, a simple digital audio player, the kind used for high-fidelity music. "Mr. Kincaid," Vale said, "as the ranking officer, you are here to witness the presentation of triggering evidence." He pressed play. The room was instantly filled with sound, not music, not voices. First, the ambient sound of a party, distant laughter, the clink of glasses. Then, a low, hissing voice, Marla's voice, "Making the numbers look bad." My own voice, low, controlled. "Resolves to a residential router, right here. It matches the IP address of this house." And then, ting. The sound was shockingly loud in the sterile room. It was sharp, metallic, and unmistakable. The sound of Marla's bracelet hitting my face. It was followed by a sharp, wet gasp, my own, and the sound of me hitting the wall. Then, the crash of the wine glass shattering on the stone floor. Vale pressed pause. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the rain. Bram Kincaid's mouth was hanging open. My father closed his eyes, his face ashen. Marla, however, laughed, a short, sharp bark. "That," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "is pathetic. It's obviously edited, spliced. You've been, in your basement, Ava, playing with audio files to frame me?" Bram Kincaid looked at Vale. "She's right. That could be anything. It's just noise." "We anticipated this objection," Vale said calmly. He tapped a button on the large conference phone in the center of the table. "Dr. Alistair Finch, are you on the line?" A new voice, crisp and British, filled the room via the speakerphone. "I am Mr. Vale." "Dr. Finch," Vale continued, "could you state your credentials for the room?" "Certainly. I am the director of the Audio Forensics Lab at MIT. My specialization is in non-destructive signal authentication." Marla's posture tightened. This was not some local techie. "And doctor," Vale said, "did you, last night, at approximately 10:17 p.m., receive a digital audio file, time-stamped 9:43 p.m., from a secure server designated HRGVN001? "I did." "And did you perform your analysis to determine if that file had been edited, spliced, or in any way altered?" "I did," the voice said. "I ran a full spectral analysis, an error-level analysis, and a phase consistency check. The file is raw, unedited, and continuous. The metadata is clean. What you heard is precisely what the microphone recorded, in sequence. It is, in my professional opinion, an authentic, untampered recording." Vale looked at Marla. "Is it edited, Ms. Ridgewell?" Marla's face was white. She said nothing. Vale slid a copy of the Founders' Agreement across the table. "As Dr. Finch has authenticated the triggering event under Section 2B, I will now read the relevant clause aloud." He read it, every word, the part about domestic violence, related party ecosystem, and immediate and temporary suspension of all voting rights and compensation. When he finished, he looked to a third man at the table, someone I hadn't recognized, sitting quietly by the door. Mr. Harrelson, as the board's independent governance counsel, do you confirm the validity of this clause? Mr. Harrelson, a mild-looking man in a rumpled suit, nodded. I have reviewed the agreement. The clause is ironclad. Then, as of 9:07 a.m., October 27th, Vale announced, all voting rights held by CFO Marla Ridgewell are hereby suspended, pending a full investigation. She is here, now, as a non-voting officer, to answer questions. Bram Kincaid looked like he'd been struck. He had just lost his keyboard ally, his financial architect. Marla was staring at Harlan, her eyes two slits of pure, distilled hatred. She was wounded. She was trapped. But Harlan, I saw, was not done. This was just the opening move. This was the key in the door. He still hadn't turned the handle. My grandfather, who had not spoken a single word, now looked down the entire 20-foot length of the glass table. His eyes met mine. The purple, swollen skin of my cheek was reflected in his gaze. Ava, he said. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. You are the head of the analysis team. You were the one she was confronting about making the numbers look bad. He paused, letting the words sink in. Do you, he asked, have anything you wish to present? This was it, the pivot. He had used the slap to get in the room. Now, he was giving me the floor. I took a slow, deep breath, the air cold in my lungs. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out my keys. I slid the small, metal maple leaf keychain onto the glass table. It made a small, clear, skake-s sound as it slid to a stop next to Vale's audio recorder. The USB drive. Marla's eyes snapped from Harlan's face to the keychain. She recognized it. I had seen her watch me fidget with it in meetings. Her mask of concrete finally cracked. I saw the first, true flicker of panic. Yes, grandfather, I said, my voice clear and steady. I do. I took the maple leaf keychain. The USB drive was integrated into the metal stem. I walked the length of the table, the sound of my heels a sharp click, click, click on the polished stone floor. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Marla. I looked at the 85-inch 4K screen that dominated the front wall. I plugged the drive into the table's central port. Mr. Kincaid? I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room. Last night, Mrs. Ridgewell confronted me because my quarterly risk analysis was, in her words, making the numbers look bad. I am here to show you the numbers she was referring to. I brought up my desktop. It was clean, just one file. I opened it. The screen was instantly filled with a complex data model, a web of nodes and transaction lines, but in the center, highlighted in red, was a single cluster. This is a fraud detection model my team developed, I said. It's designed to spot non-obvious patterns in vendor payments. 6 months ago, it flagged a new entity, Brindle Apex Logistics. This entity did not exist 7 months ago. I clicked. The screen changed to a simple spreadsheet. 17 payments, I stated, over the last 6 months, totaling $164,850. I highlighted the column of figures. 9,800, 9,950, 9,900, 8,900. Every single payment is a unique amount, but all share one characteristic. They are just below the $10,000 automatic audit threshold. Bram Kincaid leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He understood structured payments. These payments, I continued, were coded as IT infrastructure consulting and data services. They were set on a recurring, but not fixed, cycle. They repeated roughly every 13 days, just outside a standard bi-weekly or monthly flag. I clicked again. The screen split. On the left, the Brindle Apex Logistics corporate filing. The address listed was 1700 Industrial Way, Grayford. On the right, a high-resolution commercial satellite image, timestamp 3 days ago. 1700 Industrial Way was not a warehouse. It was not an office. It was a half-acre blemish of gravel and weeds, an empty, fenced-in lot. Brindle Apex has no physical presence, I said. Its address is a ghost, a virtual warehouse. Marla said nothing. Her face was stone, but her hands were gripping the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. The payments were all authorized through the Procure Help at email portal, a general inbox for routine supplier requests, I said. I brought up an email. Here is the authorization for payment number 12, from Procure Help, but when you trace the digital signature of the sender, I clicked, and a certificate of authenticity window popped up. The signature does not belong to the procurement department. It belongs to Sarah Jenkins, Mrs. Ridgewell's personal assistant. Bram Kincaid swore, a short, sharp word under his breath. That's thin, Marla said, her voice strained. My assistant handles my procurement. It's efficient. Is this also efficient? I asked. I switched screens. This is the company's VPN login journal for the last 24 hours. I highlighted a single-line entry. Timestamp, 21:43:02, 9:43 p.m. Octi 26. User, Marlab. Access IP, 72 or 213.1.101. Residential, Maple Heights Pool. Action, manually approve pending wire transfer, 8844. Brindle Apex. Last night, I said, my voice cold and flat. At 9:43 p.m., just moments before you entered the kitchen to confront me, you were logged into the company VPN from your house, bypassing standard protocol, to personally approve the 18th payment to this ghost company, the payment you hit me for trying to expose. My father made a small, sick sound. Let's look at one of these invoices, I said, pulling up a PDF. Invoice 7792 for specialized ergonomic medical hardware, 9200. I then pulled up a second file. It was an internal asset tracking manifest for 11 Larkspur Street, part of the home security and smart home package Harlan had installed. And this, I said, is the asset log for the home gym, installed 2 months ago. One Nordic Track X32i incline trainer, serial number 88142B, and here, on the Brindle Apex invoice, is the lot code for the medical hardware shipped, 88142B. I looked up from the screen. You didn't even bother to change the numbers. You bought yourself a new treadmill with company money and expensed it as medical hardware through your shell company. The room was silent, save for the hammering rain. This is circumstantial, Bram whispered, but his voice lacked all conviction. He was looking at Marla with a new, dawning horror. I agree, I said. It's a strong pattern, but it's not a confession, which is why I set a trap. I brought up my final screen. It was a blank directory. One file. Brindle Apex Q4 Projections, XLSX. This, I said, is a honey token, a fake file. It's an Excel sheet that appears to be a Q4 projection for Brindle Apex, filled with fake, damning numbers. But it's not a real file. It's a tracking beacon. It's designed to look like a file someone missaved to the public server. It's bait. The file cannot be opened. The moment someone tries to access it, their user ID, their IP address, and their time of access are logged to a secure separate server. I pointed to the file. I planted this file at 4:50 p.m. yesterday, just before I left for the party. I named it something irresistible to anyone who had a secret stake in Brindle Apex. Marla was staring at the screen, her face bloodless. She knew what was coming. I checked the access log at 8:30 this morning, I said. 2 people tried to open this file. I brought up the log. Log entry 1, timestamp 22:15:04, 10:15 p.m., October 26, user, Marlab, IP 72/4/203/101, residential, Maple Heights Pool, status, access denied, logged. The first attempt was from Marla. I said, last night, after Harlan left, after she realized I knew about Brindle Apex, she must have panicked, gone to her computer, and searched the server for any files with that name. She found my trap. She took the bait. I let the first entry sink in. Bram Kincaid was shaking his head, a look of utter betrayal on his face. But she wasn't the only one, I said. I highlighted the second entry. Log entry 2. Timestamp 22 to 1931. 10:19 p.m. Octa 26. User GKINC Ops. IP 14.881027. Residential Grayford Heights Pool. Status: access denied. Logged. Arthur Vale, the lawyer, read the user ID aloud. GKINC. Who does that ID belong to? I looked directly at the man at the head of the table. Bram Kincaid's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been full of horror, were now wide with pure animal panic. GKINC was his executive operations handle. 4 minutes after Marla tried to access the file, I said, my voice cutting through the room. You tried to access it, Mr. Kincaid, from your home. She must have called you, frantic, and you too, walked right into the trap. The entire room pivoted. Harlan, the lawyers, my father, all of them were now staring at the CEO. Bram was staring at Marla, his face a mask of purple rage. You stupid, he began. Explain this, Marla, he finally growled, trying to regain control, to shift the blame. Explain it, now. Marla, cornered, with her partner in crime now turned against her, spat. She looked at Harlan. This is a joke, she hissed, her voice shaking but full of venom. She's been planning this. This is revenge. Revenge because I disciplined her. Revenge because her father finally chose me. She's a vindictive, unstable little brat with a spreadsheet, and she's fabricated all of this. Her words hung in the air, a desperate, pathetic defense. I didn't react. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The data was on the screen, cold, objective, and final. I turned my head and looked, for the first time that morning, directly at my father. He was staring at the screen, at the asset log for the treadmill, at the IP address for his own house. He was looking at the proof that his wife, the woman he had chosen, had been stealing, and that his CEO, the man who signed his bonus checks, was in on it. His entire world, his stable, comfortable, green KPI world, was a lie. I just held his gaze. I said nothing. I let him see my face, the purple and yellow bruise, and I let him see the data, and I waited for him to choose. My voice hung in the air. A final cold period at the end of a long, damning sentence. The data on the 85-inch screen glowed, an unblinking, objective witness, the honey token log, with both Marlab and GKINC caught in its digital snare, was an irrefutable confession. Bram Kincaid was sputtering, his face a mottled, unhealthy red. This is a setup. This is a conspiracy. Marla was silent, but it was the silence of a supernova, a compression of energy so violent it was almost audible. She was staring at me, and if a look could kill, I would have been incinerated. But I was not looking at either of them. My presentation was finished. My data had spoken. My eyes were locked on one person, the man who had been a ghost in his own life, my father. Robert Ridgewell. He was staring at the screen, not at the VPN logs, not at the honey token. He was staring at the invoice for the treadmill, the one with the serial number that matched the home asset log. It was such a small thing, a $9,200 piece of gym equipment. It wasn't the millions he'd gained in bonuses. It was the petty, tangible, domestic theft that had finally broken through his wall of denial. It was a purchase he had probably seen, one he had likely used. His gaze was slow, agonizing, as it tore away from the screen. It traveled down the long glass table. It passed Harlan. It passed the lawyers. And it landed on me. He saw me, really saw me. He saw the angry, swollen purple skin on my cheekbone, the yellowing bruise that spread down toward my jaw, the pallid, sick-looking concealer that failed to hide any of it. He saw the physical evidence of the violence he had ignored. And then, his eyes dropped to the iPad sitting on the glass in front of him. I knew what was on that screen. It was his default, the glass embrace stock ticker, and next to it, the portal for his executive compensation package. It was a sea of green KPIs, green performance charts, green bonus projections, the entire beautiful, stable, comfortable lie that Marla and Bram had built for him, the lie he had lived in, happily, for years. He was looking at his choice, personified. My face, or his fortune, me, or Marla, the truth, or the lie. The room was so quiet, I could hear the microscopic skirk of Harlan's cane on the polished stone floor. My grandfather was not looking at his son. He was looking at a point in the middle distance. He was perfectly still, except for his right hand, which rested on the silver cap of his cane. He was turning it, just a quarter-inch left, a quarter-inch right, grinding the cane's metal tip against the floor. It was a dry, patient, abrasive sound, the sound of stone being slowly worn away. He was not going to help. He was not going to nudge. He was not going to threaten. He was making his son, my father, choose. Marla saw him wavering. "Robert," she said, her voice dropping, attempting to sound like a wife, like a partner. "Robert, look at me. You know me. This is that old man's poison. This is her, trying to tear us apart. Tell them, Robert, tell them this is a lie." He didn't look at her. He just kept staring at his iPad, at the glowing green numbers. And so I spoke. My voice was quiet, not emotional. It was the voice of an analyst stating facts. "You knew," I said. My father flinched, his eyes snapping back to me. "What? No, Ava, I never—" "You knew," I repeated. "Not the details, not the treadmill or brindle apex, but you knew her." I nodded at Marla. "You knew how she was." I didn't need to shout. The facts were enough. Every strategy meeting I was accidentally uninvited to, you saw the invites. You knew I was left off. Every budget review where my team's projections were lost in the server, and I was made to look incompetent, you were in those meetings. "The emails," I said, my voice dropping. "The little miss spreadsheet comments she'd make, CCing you and Bram, the jokes about me being in the weeds and not seeing the big picture. You read them, and you said nothing." "The dinners," I whispered, and I felt the first crack in my own composure. The Sunday dinners at Larkspur, where I would start to talk about a market trend, and she would cut me off, loudly, to ask the caterer for more wine. And you would just let her. You would just let the silence swallow me, again and again. I took a breath, the air shuddering in my lungs. You sat there, night after night, and you watched her erase me, because it was easier, because it was stable, because the stock price was high. Tears were streaming down my father's face now, not tears of remorse, tears of self-pity. He was crumbling. "I didn't know," he whispered, a pathetic, broken sound. "Ava, I promise. I just thought it was work stress. I thought it was just personalities, a strong personality. It was the excuse I had heard my whole life, the excuse that had enabled everything." "You thought," I said, and my voice was cold again, the ice from my cheek spreading through my veins. "You chose to think it was stress. You chose to think it was nothing, and while you were busy thinking, they were busy using it. They used your passivity. They used your willful blindness as a shield. Your stability was the cost of my safety, and it was the cover for their theft." I looked from my father to Bram Kincaid. Both of them. That was it. I had said my piece. Mr. Harrelson, the board's independent governance council, cleared his throat. He saw his opening. The moral argument was over. Now, the legal one. He reached into his own briefcase and produced 2 thin documents, each a single page. He slid them onto the glass table, placing them directly in front of my father. "Robert." "Mr. Ridgewell," Harrelson said, his voice mild, as if discussing the weather. "As the only other Ridgewell family member on this board, and with Mrs. Ridgewell's voting rights suspended." You are the pivot point. The governance committee, per the bylaws, presents you with 2 resolutions. He tapped the first document. Resolution A, a motion to temporarily suspend CFO Marla Ridgewell and CEO Bram Kincaid, effective immediately. It tables a full, independent, third-party forensic audit of all vendor payments and executive compensation, to be overseen by Mr. Harlan Ridgewell or his legal designate. All findings to be reported to the SEC and the investor group within 30 days. Then, he tapped the second document. Resolution B, a motion to table these allegations as unsubstantiated pending further internal review, and to take no immediate action against the officers. This resolution, I must advise you, would require us to immediately disclose the full nature of this meeting, including the audio recording and the honey token logs, to our investors, as it represents a significant internal governance crisis. We would, in effect, be telling the market that we know about the fire, but have chosen not to put it out. He placed a single, heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen on the table, precisely between the 2 documents. The choice? 1 minute, the clock on the wall, a minimalist glass circle with no numbers, just 2 black hands, was appallingly loud. Lach, tach, lach, tach. It was the longest minute of my life. I watched my father. He was staring at the 2 pieces of paper. Resolution A. He would save the company, save what was left of its integrity. He would validate me. He would lose his wife. He would lose his bonuses. He would lose his comfortable, stable life. He would lose the lie. Resolution B. He would side with Marla. He would try to keep the money, keep the lie. The company would implode in a public scandal. He would lose everything, including the last shred of my respect. He was shaking, a full-body tremor. Lach, tach. Tach. Marla was staring at him, her eyes burning, trying to hold him with her will. Robert, don't you dare! Bram was sweating, mopping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Robert, think about the stability, the investors. We can fix this. We can manage it, quietly. My father looked at the pen. He looked at Marla, at her face, twisted in a mask of rage and desperation. He looked at Bram, a sweating, cornered man. He looked at Harlan, who was still, silent, waiting, grinding his cane. Skirk! And he looked at me, at my bruised, swollen face. His hand, trembling so violently he could barely control it, reached out. It hovered over Resolution B, the one that would side with Marla. It hovered for a full 5 seconds. Lach, tach. And then it moved. He grabbed the pen. He pulled Resolution A toward him. The paper snagged on the glass, making a sharp, tearing sound. His hand was shaking so badly that his signature was almost illegible. It was a spidery, broken, desperate scrawl, but it was there. Robert Ridgewell. He signed. He dropped the pen as if it were on fire. Marla screamed. It was not a word. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, undiluted fury. She shot out of her chair, the heavy steel chair scraping back with a sound like a car crash. You! She shrieked, but she wasn't looking at her husband. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Harlan. You did this. You old relic. You couldn't stand it. You couldn't stand that he chose me. You will regret this, old man. I will burn this company to the ground before I let you. Harlan raised his left hand, the same gesture from the kitchen, palm out. We are not done yet, he said. His voice was a blade. It cut through her hysteria, silencing her instantly. Marla froze, her mouth open. Bram Kincaid looked up, his face a mask of confusion. My father looked up, his face a mask of dread. Done? Bram stammered. What do you mean? Not done. He signed. We're suspended. You're launching an audit. It's over. Harlan finally stood up, pushing his chair back. He picked up his cane. He looked at me, and then at Bram and Marla. That, he said, was for the slap. That was for the family. He nodded toward the papers my father had signed. Now, we talk about the money. Now, Harlan said, his voice dropping into a register of cold, hard finality. We talk about the money. Bram Kincaid, still reeling, looked up. What money? The audit? He signed the suspension. It's being handled. No, Harlan said. The audit is slow. The investors are fast. The employees are faster. They are the ones who have been living under your green KPI culture. They are the ones whose 401ks are tied to the integrity of this stock. They deserve to know why their bonuses were cut to fund yours. They deserve transparency. Now. He nodded to Arthur Vale. Mr. Vale, initiate the all hands. Bram's head snapped around. What? An all hands? Are you insane? You can't. That's corporate suicide. On the contrary, Vale said, his fingers already dancing on a tablet. We find transparency is an excellent disinfectant. Per the emergency governance bylaws, a crisis of confidence event requires an immediate address to all employees. A small, previously unnoticed camera in the corner of the room whirred to life. A tiny, bright red light appeared. On the 85-inch screen, next to my data, a new window popped up. A small black square with a Live 12 icon. The board. This is an outrage, Marla shouted. Finally finding her voice, she grabbed her phone from the table. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling a judge. I will have you removed for this. She stared at the phone. Her thumb jabbed the screen. Again and again. Her face, already pale, turned the color of ash. There's no signal, she whispered. She looked up, her eyes wide with the first taste of true, powerless panic. You're blocking me. That's illegal. Not at all, Mr. Vale said, not even looking up. Per the suspension you just witnessed, which is now in effect, standard risk mitigation protocol has been initiated. Your corporate network access, your building credentials, and your company-paid cellular service have all been temporarily contained. It's in the ethics agreement you signed. Mrs. Ridgewell, page 14. She was cut off, a digital island. Harlan ignored her. He looked at me, down the long glass table. Ava, the money. The red light on the camera was a hot, steady eye. I was no longer presenting to a room. I was presenting to the entire company. I walked back to the podium. My hand was steady. The pain in my cheek was just a dull, cold fact. The suspension, I said, my voice clear and amplified by the room's microphones, was for the assault. The audit my father just authorized is for the theft. But Mr. Kincaid is right. An audit is slow, and it's unnecessary. I clicked my remote. The screen changed. I already have the confession. We have been looking at the payments. Now, let's look at the contract that started it all. On the screen, a new document appeared. Master Services Agreement, Brindle Apex Logistics. This, I said, is the MSA that onboarded Brindle Apex as a specialized IT vendor. It's the document that gave them a blank check, the one that authorized the Procure Help portal to approve their invoices. It's the root. I zoomed in. The signature block was at the bottom of the last page. It's a digital contract, I said. Executed and sealed. I zoomed in further, until the name filled the screen. Approved and executed by Bramwell G. Kincaid, CEO. Bram? My father whispered, his voice cracking. Bram Kincaid shot to his feet, knocking his chair over. Forgery! That is an absolute, slanderous forgery. My digital signature is secured by a two-factor hardware token. It's impossible. It's in my office safe, on the 60th floor. I've never seen this document. She faked it. Harlan, from his seat, tapped the speakerphone. Dr. Finch, your opinion, please. The British voice of the forensic expert filled the room again, now broadcast to 5,000 employees. No forgery. Mr. Kincaid, the signature is 100% authentic. It was validated against the company's own cryptographic logs. The signature was authorized using your assigned unique FIPS 142 compliant hardware token. When? Bram choked out. When? Timestamp 02:17 a.m., April 14th, 6 months ago, the same day the Brindle Apex corporate entity was registered in Delaware. Bram was hyperventilating, his eyes bugging. My token! It's in my safe! It's... His head swiveled, his wild eyes landing on Marla. You told me it was a discretionary fund. A simple vendor. My token is in my safe, he screamed. Who took my token from my safe? An excellent question for security, Arthur Vale said. He brought up a new window on the main screen, a silent, black and white video feed. The executive hallway, 60th floor. This, Vale said, is from 10:45 p.m. last night, approximately 1 hour after Mr. Harlan Ridgewell left your party. Mrs. Ridgewell. The footage showed Marla, in her party dress, striding down the empty 60th floor hallway. She used her executive keycard to enter Bram's dark office. The camera's angle just caught the corner of his desk. She went to his private safe, hidden behind a print. She punched in a code. She opened it. She was inside for 30 seconds, then left, palming a small, dark object. You, Bram whispered, his face purple. You went into my safe. You were cleaning up. You were in on it from the start, Marla shrieked, finally breaking. You signed the contract. You took the first payout. Silence. Harlan's voice wasn't a shout, but it cracked through the room like a whip. The two of them froze, their mutual panicked hatred exposed for the entire company to see. Harlan looked at me. Ava, one last file, if you please. I looked at the camera. I looked at the red light. I pulled the Maple Leaf USB from the port. The anonymous email I received, I said. The one that warned me to stop looking at Brindle Apex. It wasn't the last one. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a second USB drive, a cheap, black, plastic one. This one arrived 2 months ago. It's not data. It's a video. I believe it was from Marla's assistant, Sarah Jenkins, right before she was restructured and forced to sign an NDA. I plugged it in. The screen flickered, then filled with a new image, grainy, shaky video, filmed from a low angle, as if a phone was sitting in a purse on a chair. The location was unmistakable. Bram Kincaid's office. The audio was clear. Too much. Too fast, Bram's voice said. He was pacing by the window. We're bleeding the supplier budget dry. Marla, people are going to notice. Marla's voice, calm, arrogant. It's fine. It's just enough bleed off that no one notices. A few million is a rounding error in a company this size. Robert, she laughed, is too stupid and comfortable to ever look. And that little bitch in analysis? My breath hitched. That little bitch in analysis? Ava? I'll handle her. I'll bury her in useless reports until she quits. She's not a problem. The video file ended. I stepped back. The proof was total. The motive, the conspiracy, the execution, the cover-up. I glanced at the side panel I had opened on my own laptop, which was plugged into the feed, the live stream's internal chat. It was an avalanche. OMG, they're stealing. They're stealing our money. Ava Ridgewell. They called Robert stupid the treadmill. She bought a treadmill. Kincaid and Marla, both of them. Fire them now. Ava Ridgewell. The viewer count, which had started at 12, was now 5,182. The entire company, everyone. Marla saw it. She saw the chat feed scrolling at light speed. She saw the red live light on the camera. She finally, truly understood. This wasn't a meeting. This wasn't an audit. It was a public execution. Harlan Ridgewell slowly pushed himself to his feet. He picked up his walnut cane. He walked to the window, the glass wall that gave the room its name, and looked out at the rain-lashed city. The glass in this building, he said, his voice now a low, reflective rumble, broadcast to 5,000 people. It's not just for show, It's supposed to be for transparency, a symbol that we have nothing to hide. He turned back, his shadow long in the room. But when the glass gets this dirty, when it gets so covered in filth that you can't see out and no one can see in, you have to break it. You have to let the air in. He looked at Bram and Marla, two figures frozen in their expensive, tailored cages. He nodded to Arthur Vale. Vale picked up his personal phone. "Security," he said. "38th floor. Catalyst room. 2 officers. Please, we have 2 suspended employees who need to be escorted from the building." It was Bram who moved first. He was a cornered animal. With a choked sob of rage, he lunged for the doors. He slammed his hand on the silver exit panel. Click, click. The light on the panel flashed red. "Open!" he roared, slamming his shoulder into the smoked glass. "Open the damn door!" He clawed at the panel again. Click, click. Arthur Vale spoke, his voice dry, as he packed his papers. "Catalyst is on a full security lockdown. Mr. Kincaid, per the emergency governance protocol, the one you yourself signed in 2022. Once the crisis of confidence stream was initiated, these doors were sealed." He looked up, his face devoid of emotion. "No one leaves until security arrives." Bram Kincaid slid down the glass door, his legs giving out, leaving a damp, pathetic streak on the smoked glass. Marla just stood, vibrating, her hands clenched, her face a mask of silent, primal hatred. They were trapped. The glass room, their pristine symbol of untouchable power, was now their prison. The click-click of the red flashing lock panel was the only sound for a full 10 seconds. Bram was a heap of expensive tailoring on the floor by the door. Marla stood rigid, her hands 2 white-knuckled claws at her side. My father was still in his chair, his head in his hands, staring at his own signature. Then, a new sound. Beezy's teeth thunk. The doors hadn't unlocked. They had been overridden from the outside. 2 men in crisp, dark blue security uniforms entered. They were large, impassive, and wore duty belts that creaked with the sound of processed leather and secured equipment. They did not look at anyone. They simply entered, flanked the door, and stood, hands clasped behind their backs. They were the punctuation marks to Harlan's speech. The red live light on the camera was still on. 5,182 employees were still watching. "Now," Harlan said, turning back from the window, "the house is clean. Let's make it official." He nodded to the speakerphone. "Mr. Harrelson, please call the remaining board members to order. I believe they've been watching." "We're here. Harlan," a new voice boomed from the speaker. It was Jack Vance, head of the Asia-Pacific office, a man who respected only Harlan. "My God, we're here. What do you need?" "A vote," Harlan said. He was no longer a guest. He was the chairman, a role he'd never officially held, but was now assuming by force. "Mr. Harrelson," Harlan said. "Resolution C, the termination of Bramwell Kincaid." "A motion is on the floor," Harrelson said, his voice now crisp and formal. "To terminate CEO Bramwell Kincaid for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to defraud the company. All in favor?" "Aye," boomed Jack Vance's voice. "Aye," said a third board member, a woman from the London office. Harrelson looked at my father, his face still in his hands, just whispered, "Aye." The motion passes unanimously. Bramwell Kincaid is terminated, for cause, effective immediately. Bram made a high, keening sound from the floor. One of the security guards took a single, deliberate step toward him. "Resolution D," Harlan continued, his voice like ice. "The appointment of an interim CEO. I nominate Eleanor Hayes, of Hayes Restructuring, to assume the role, effective at noon today." Hayes, she was a legend, a cleaner, a woman who came into wrecked companies, salvaged the assets, and executed the guilty, that Harlan had her on standby. He had planned this for months. The vote was unanimous. Aye, aye, aye. "Resolution E," Harlan said. The termination of CFO Marla Ridgewell. My father flinched. For cause, Harlan specified, gross misconduct, conspiracy to defraud, and violation of the company's ethics and conduct policy. All in favor? Aye, boomed Vance. Aye, said the London director. My father was silent. His hand was shaking. Marla was staring at him, her eyes burning holes in his skull. Robert, she whispered. A threat. He looked at her. He saw the hatred. He saw the stranger he had married. Aye, he choked out. The motion passes, Harrelson declared. Marla Ridgewell is terminated, for cause, effective immediately. Harlan looked at the camera, at the 5,182 employees. The cancer is cut out, he said. The audit begins today. The new CEO begins today. We will be transparent. We will be fair. And we will rebuild. That is all. He nodded to Vale. The red light went off. The all-hands feed was cut. The silence that descended was heavier than anything that had come before. The adrenaline of the public execution was gone, leaving the cold, sterile air of a morgue. Right, Arthur Vale said. Standing up, he slid 2 thick envelopes from his briefcase. He walked over to Bram Kincaid, who was still on the floor, weeping. Mr. Kincaid, your termination papers. You will be escorted to your office to retrieve your personal effects, and then escorted from the building. You will hand over your badge, your phones, and your laptop. Now. The first security guard leaned down and, not unkindly, looped a hand under Bram's arm. Up you get, sir. Bram was hauled to his feet, a boneless, sobbing wreck. He was led out of the room. Now, there were 4 of us, me, Harlan, my father, and Marla. Vale approached her. He placed the second envelope on the glass table in front of her. Mrs. Ridgewell, your terms of exit. She stared at it, not moving. You are terminated for cause, Vale said, as if reading a grocery list. As such, all unvested stock, options, and futures are clawed back, effective immediately. All vested stock is being placed in escrow, pending the results of the forensic audit. To cover the funds you misappropriated, you are to hand over your laptop, all company phones, and your access badge. You will be escorted from the building immediately. Marla just laughed, a dry, cracked, ugly sound. Fine, she said. I'll see you in court. I'll take this company, and I'll take him. She jerked her head at my father. For every penny he has. Harlan spoke. He had walked over, and he stood just a few feet from her. He spoke so quietly, only she and I could hear him. You won't, he said. You will repay the $164,850 from the Brindle Apex invoices. You will also pay 12% compound interest, calculated daily from the date of each transaction. The total comes to $178,412.22. You will wire that amount from your personal accounts to a holding account specified by Mr. Vale. You have until 5 p.m. Friday. Marla sneered. Or what, old man? You'll sue me? Get in line. Or, Harlan said, I will file the criminal report, the one Mr. Vale prepared this morning for the district attorney's office, the one that outlines 17 counts of wire fraud. The civil suit, for the rest of the money, is already being filed as we speak. This is just for the treadmill. He leaned in. This is not a negotiation. This is the price for you to stay out of a federal prison. Pay it, or I will have you arrested before you reach your car. Do you understand me? Marla's face, which had been a mask of rage, crumbled. The threat of prison, the actual physical reality of it, had finally broken her. She just nodded, a small, jerky motion. Good, Harlan stepped back. Mr. Harrelson, the board counsel, cleared his throat. He looked at me. Ms. Ridgewell, Ava, in light of your exceptional work, the board would like you to co-chair the independent investigation with full access and authority. I looked at him. I looked at Harlan. No, I said. Harrelson looked stunned. I beg your pardon? I said no, I repeated. I cannot be objective. I was a victim of the corporate culture and of Mrs. Ridgewell personally. Appointing me would be a conflict of interest. The investigation must be truly independent. Appoint Eleanor Hayes. I let that sink in. It was the right move, the clean move. However, I continued, this company's entire analysis division has been operating under a corrupt CFO. It needs new leadership, effective immediately. I am accepting the position of acting director of the analysis division, reporting directly to the interim CEO. Harlan didn't smile, but the corner of his eye crinkled. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. Harrelson just nodded, stunned. Of course, Director. We will make it so. My father finally stood up. His chair scraped. The sound like a wounded animal. He looked at his hands, then at Marla. He didn't look at her, so much as past her. He turned and walked, like a somnambulist, toward the door. He stopped in front of me. His face was a ruin. The confident, stable, happy man was gone, replaced by this gray, hollow shell. Ava, he whispered. His voice was raw. He looked at my face, at the bruise, and his own face crumpled. I didn't see. He just stood there for a moment, letting those three pathetic, inadequate, and utterly true words hang in the air. Then, he turned and walked out of the catalyst room, a broken man. Now, it was just me and Marla, and the second security guard, who was patiently holding a cardboard box, with stiff, jerky motions. Marla unplugged her laptop. She slid it into the box. She took her company phone and dropped it in. She unclipped her access badge from her suit jacket and placed it on top. She looked up, her eyes empty of everything but a cold, black, concentrated hate. The guard motioned to the door. She began to walk. As she passed me, she stopped. She was close enough that I could smell her sharp, green perfume, now soured by sweat and fear. "You'll be alone," she hissed, her voice a dry rasp. "You did this. You burned down the whole house. You'll have this big, empty, cold company. And you'll be alone. You're just like him." She looked at Harlan, a miserable, cold, lonely old relic. I didn't flinch. I held her gaze. I could feel the throb in my cheek, a dull, physical reminder of the truth. "Better alone," I said. Then silent. Her face twisted. The guard touched her elbow. "Ma'am." She was escorted out. The door hissed shut, and then there was silence. The rain had finally stopped. It was just me and Harlan, in the huge, empty, sun-drenched room. The storm had broken, and the morning light was streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He walked over to me. He held out his hand. In his palm was my keychain, the small metal maple leaf, but it was different. He had taken the USB drive out of it, and in its place, he had attached a new, matte black keycard. It had no name, no photo, just the Glass and Bray logo. "Your access," he said. "All floors, including the 60th. He dropped it into my hand. I walked to the window, the card heavy and cool in my palm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a company-wide email. From HR. Subject: A new era of transparency. The memo was short. It announced the new interim CEO. It announced the terminations. And it ended with a single line I knew Harlan had written. "Transparency begins when a victim is given the power to speak the truth. We are grateful to Ava Ridgewell, our new acting director of analysis, for her courage." My phone buzzed again. A news alert. G&B Partners. G&B, OSTS CEO. CFO in emergency vote. Shares. I held my breath. I clicked the link. The investor report had gone out. The stock, which had been frozen, had just reopened. It hadn't crashed. It hadn't plummeted. It was ticking up. 1/4 of a point. Green. The market doesn't hate a scandal. It hates uncertainty. And Harlan had just given it absolute, brutal certainty. I looked at my reflection in the glass, at the bruised, swollen, victorious face staring back. I was in charge. I was safe. I was free. The smoked glass doors of Catalyst hissed shut, the sound a final, soft sigh. The security guards, having escorted their quarry, were gone. The lawyers, their briefcases snapped shut, had disappeared. Bram was gone. Marla was gone. My father, a man made of fog, had evaporated. The room was suddenly, shockingly, vast and silent. The storm, which had lashed the 38th floor windows for hours, had finally broken. The relentless drumming percussion of the rain had ceased. In its place, a profound, heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the faint, electric hum of the dormant technology. The morning sun, which had been a rumor, now cut through the retreating clouds. Long, angular shafts of pale gold light lanced across the 20-foot glass table, illuminating the detritus of the battle, the empty water glasses, the smudged fingerprints, the two vacant, overturned chairs of the fallen executives, and the single, spidery, desperate signature of my father. It was the aftermath. I stood by the window, the new, black keycard heavy and cool in my hand. I raised my other hand, my fingers trembling, not from fear, but from a deep, cellular exhaustion. I touched my cheek. The skin was tight, swollen, and felt like cured leather, but the fire, the hot, sharp, agonizing burn from last night, was gone. It had cooled, receded, leaving behind a deep, cold, immovable ache. It was no longer an injury, it was a fact, set in stone. Harlan hadn't left. He was standing at the head of the table, where Bram had sat, looking down at the city he had just quietly, ruthlessly, reclaimed. He turned, his face as impassive as the glass skyline. He walked toward me, his steps a slow, measured beat on the stone floor. The thud, thud, thud of his cane was the only percussion in the silent room. He stopped beside me, shoulder to shoulder. We both stared out the window, at our two reflections superimposed over the healing city. He did not offer a word of comfort. He did not smile. He did not congratulate me. Instead, he raised his right hand, the one holding the walnut cane. He didn't offer it to me. He didn't hand it to me. He simply, deliberately, lowered it, placing the heavy silver cap directly on top of my hand, the one that clutched the new, black director's key. He tapped it, twice. Thud, thud. The impact was solid, a transfer of weight, a knighting. "I did not save you," he said. His voice was a low, quiet rumble, meant only for me, not for the ghosts in the room. "I built the walls. I set the locks. I listened for the fire." He paused, his eyes on our reflections. "You were the one who found the key. You were the one who turned it. You opened the door yourself." I looked at him, at his aged, hawk-like profile in the glass. He was right. He had laid the snare, but I was the one who had walked into the dark, gathered the proof, and chosen to spring it. He hadn't rescued a victim. He had merely armed a survivor. He nodded. Once, a short, sharp gesture of dismissal. His part was over. He turned and walked back toward the head of the table, his gaze already on the stock ticker. I turned and walked away. The doors to Catalyst hissed open for me. The main 38th floor lobby was empty, a vast atrium of glass and steel, now scrubbed clean by the morning sun. The air smelled of wet stone and ozone. I walked to the elevator bank. A car was waiting, its steel doors open, a silent, empty box. I stepped inside, alone. The doors slid shut, sealing me in. There was no music, no soft, synthetic chimes, just the low, powerful whir of the industrial-grade cables and the deep, resonant thrum of the massive counterweights, the sound of a machine, doing its job. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen was blindingly bright in the dim, brushed steel light of the elevator. A new email from HR. Subject: Welcome. Director Ridgewell. Your new credentials and access permissions have been fully activated. I stared at the words. Director. I swiped out of my email and opened my photo gallery. At the top was a single image, taken at 3 a.m. in my apartment bathroom, under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent light. A clinical, high-contrast, ugly shot of my face, the swollen cheek, the distinct, red and purple handprint, the small metallic cut on the cheekbone. My insurance, my proof, my symbol of the night everything changed. I looked at the face in the photo. It was a victim. I looked up at my reflection in the polished steel doors. My suit was rumpled. My hair was a mess. My face was a grotesque map of purple and yellow, but my shoulders were back. My chin was up. My eyes were clear and hard as the glass outside. The face in the reflection was not a victim. I held my thumb over the photo of the bruise. I didn't need it anymore. The audio was logged. The testimony was given. The stock was rising. The fight was over. It was no longer an emblem. It was just a healing scar. I pressed delete. A small box popped up. Delete photo? I pressed delete. It was gone. The elevator slowed. A smooth, hydraulic sigh. The doors slid open. The main lobby, a 3-story cavern of white marble, was flooded with bright, clean, morning light. I stepped out. Grayford, the city of glass and rain, was finally, brilliantly, bright. And as I looked out at the bustling street, at the people, at the traffic, I realized that for the first time in my life, the glass didn't reflect my fear. It just reflected the sky. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So please comment below and let us know where you're listening from. We want to connect with all of you. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, like the video, and give us a massive boost by hitting that hype button. It helps get this story out to so many more listeners.